Hello, everyone. Welcome to the final workshop for this series. Um, as a quick disclaimer, as always, we are recording. So, I mean, if you do not feel comfortable having your camera on, that we totally understand. But yeah, just FYI. All right. So today for this final talk, we've talked everything so far about the application process, selection, things like that. Now we're talking about sort of what happens after the application and preparing for all of the various things. In the last session, we heard from a panel of current PhD students about their application experiences, and we learned more about just being a PhD student. In this session, we're going to talk about post-application timelines. We're going to talk about preparing for admission interviews, uh, how programs tend to respond to your applications, campus visits, and briefly we'll be talking about negotiation. This is a sort of continuation of a timeline we presented early on in some of our workshops, where we talked about all the things that happen sort of September through December when applications tend to be due. At this point, depending on when applications are due for programs, interviews may start as early as December, but they are more often or more likely in January. Faculty and admissions administration staff take breaks for holidays, much like a lot of other folks. So you don't really see anything sort of the week, especially in the United States in like Christmas, New Year's. You tend to see stuff either early January, but more often early December, but more often it's early January. Offers can begin to go out as early as January, but are likely to continue through February and may continue into March or even potentially later. However, March is often when universities want to start planning campus visits, so acceptance becomes less and less likely, though not impossible, until you get an actual rejection email. Programs will often wait a very long time to reject folks until they are certain that they have the cohort they're looking for, especially if you've made a short list, as they often do have a sort of minimum level of students that they want to accept. So if they haven't quite hit that sort of guarantee, they'll sort of kind of hedge their bets a little bit and try to hold on. So your own response to any acceptance is often then requested in the spring at some point as well, and we'll come back to that as well. This all looks like it may happen really, really fast. It sort of happens within a very sort of relatively short window. However, it can feel like a really long time when you're in there. So my advice is to make sure that you have other things to sort of think about and occupy your time. But let's talk about admissions interviews. And Karen, I'll pull that up to you, slide 6.
Okay, thank you, John.
Just let me
So,
know when you're done.
we're going to be speaking about admissions interviews. That's one of the first stages of the post-application process. After you've submitted your application, many but not all programs might conduct remote interviews before they make any type of offer. And it's important when we share about interviews to keep in mind that you can be accepted into a program even if the program does not ask you to be interviewed. But if you are asked for an interview, we really recommend that you do take advantage of that time to be able to get interviewed. Because interviews are really a good opportunity for both the program that you're applying to and you to really assess what we've mentioned time and time again, fit, to see how well both you fit the program and the program fits your needs, as well as for you to be able to gain any clarification on any questions that you might have or gain any details on what any other questions that you have, any other details that you might want to figure out as you try to make your decision on whether or not to accept the offer, assuming that you're admitted down the line. And also the staff or the faculty who conducts these interviews, they may differ. It might not be consistent from program to program. In some cases, it could be faculty that might be working with you or those from the admissions committee who might be doing the interviews. And in terms of going back to time, you can expect the interview to happen. If it happens, it would happen in the winter or sometime in the spring. Make sure that you make time to schedule it in if you're asked for one. And even though the interviews are meant for the programs to learn about you, it's a really good idea for you to come up with questions that you might ask them as well. And you'll usually learn as well along the way about who to expect in the interview process. So they'll usually let you know, or you can ask as well. Next slide, Dan, please.
Yep.
Thank you. So it's also important that you take some time to learn about your interviewers. It's a really great way, for you to prepare to do that is to learn about the research that the faculty who are interviewing you are doing. And you can do that through the papers that they've written. So choose a paper from the faculty who will be interviewing you, and read the paper and use that paper to be able to guide you along the way as you prepare for the interview. You can also use the teaching that the faculty does, the courses that the faculty teaches, to structure any questions that you might have as well. And it's good, you can see on the slide, there's different places that you can look in order to be able to prepare to find questions to ask them, etc. It's good. It's a good idea to later down the line, when you're reviewing this later, I really suggest you look at the suggestions of types of questions that you might be able to ask the interviewers as well. And you can also use the information that you found on while you were preparing your statements of purpose. So the recordings are available on YouTube. We'll be posting a link down later today to a playlist where you can watch the recordings as well. Thanks for the question. And you can, going back to the statements of purpose, you can use your research that you conducted during the statements of purpose to be able to create questions. So it's really important as you're drafting your statements of purpose, stay organized, because you can use this information down the line to remind you, oh, okay, what does this faculty do? And use that to come up with questions that you might like to ask them. The next slide, Dan.
Yeah, so it is important to know that, like, even though these interviews are sort of a big part of the admissions process, you want to sort of think of them more as a conversation than they are very much like a job interview, but you want to think of them like as a conversation. Uh, as a previous supervisor of mine put it, the interview stage should generally be about sunshine and rainbows from a tonal perspective, just meaning that essentially you want to sort of occupy a place of relaxation and sort of thinking about beginning to think about these people as, soon to be coworkers. But yeah.
And it's also a really good idea. As you relax yourself, you can use that, you can relax, you can think more to yourself. That'll help your thinking, your listening, etc., etc. And as you think of the questions that the faculty asks you as opportunities to really elaborate on your materials that you shared as part of your application. So, for example, if one of the questions that they ask you describes the research project that you proposed in your application, you can use that question. Make sure that you're answering the question directly and use that question as a way to be able to expand on a particular part of the work, while also keeping in mind it's really important to be concise as you answer the questions. If they ask you a question more about your research interests or your project without being as specific, then you'd still need to be concise, as concise as possible as you can be, and generally just make sure that you're quickly summarizing your proposed project and then going into details on that you think are important in terms of what you'd like to research, in terms of the context, where you'd like to see the project going, etc., etc. And if you're asked about when it's important when you're asking questions as well to ask about what working with the faculty is like. So ask them in order to do that, you can ask them like, how hands-on are you as a faculty, or how hands-off are you as a faculty? By hands-on and hands-off, we're referring to more of like, how involved are you in the research process of the graduate students? And you can use the information that they give you to help you decide if you'd like to research with them, depending on how you like to work. Maybe you're more of a person, you like to be given a project and you figure it out with no guidance. So maybe that could be a hands-off advisor. Whereas if you're somebody who wants more direction, who wants more specific instructions, who wants, if you if you're struggling with something and you need guidance, that might be more of a hands-on advisor. The next slide, then.
Yep.
So in terms of preparing for the interviews, a good way to think about how these interviews go is think of it as a job interview. For anyone who's had a job interview before, the graduate school interview process for PhD programs is pretty similar. So here on this slide, we pretty much list out things that you ought to do to prepare and things that you ought to avoid doing. So things like dress, in terms of what you do, making sure that you're keeping in mind what you're wearing, giving yourself time. Things take longer than we think they do. So make sure that you give yourself extra time to prepare, making sure that your Wi-Fi works correctly. And in terms of avoiding things not to do, making sure that you take the interview in a place where you can focus, where it's quiet, where not like at a coffee store, for example. And not to use a cell phone. Those would be the two things I would say are the most important in terms of things to avoid. And even though the content and tone might be different, based off of like the previous slides, if you've had a job interview, that's a pretty similar process, because as we've discussed, the job interview, you're interviewing for a job, essentially. Yes, it's a PhD student program that you're being a part of, but it's a job in and of itself. And since these interviews are virtual, usually they tend to be virtual, so I'd suggest that you have a paper copy of your notes as well, in order to help you focus on the video and not be glancing at a file open on your computer of notes. Print out the notes and have a paper copy available as well. The next slide, then.
Yeah. So we're going to talk quickly about program responses, just because we're sort of ordering this within the way that it will tend to happen for you. The biggest thing that I want to start with is emphasizing the fact that you, just because you're getting to the point where they're responding back to you, you still want to stay organized, especially if you have applied to several programs, especially if you've applied to maybe several programs at the same institution. You want to be continuing to track who has said what at this point. Um, in general, as it says, there are three types of responses that programs will give you. The first is conditional accept. Generally, if you see an email that says conditional accept, don't feel bad that that's like maybe not the perfect accept. Everyone at this point is conditionally accepted, because there's always some, even if it's just like we need your transcripts at the end of the year or that sort of thing, there's always a condition. It's always sort of worded as conditional accept. Waitlisted and declining. So now we'll talk about declines in a second, but generally speaking, yeah, just don't feel bad about conditional accept. First thing, waitlisting. Not all programs do waitlists, but it is a sort of option that can happen. Or rather, it's probably better to say that not all programs say they use waitlisting. They won't necessarily send out an email, but if you're shortlisted but not quite to whatever their sort of mark is, they will likely have you on a waitlist, whether they let you know or not. This is sort of the hardest outcome to receive, because it's basically limbo. You can't, start making plans, but you also can't start the grieving process if you've been declined. They're essentially a wait for one of the other responses response. If you're using a spreadsheet, like we've sort of talked about in some of the previous sessions, it's good to just add a column to sort of responses on there to sort of continue to organize it, and even more so to have another column that tracks specifically the deadline for your response. If they've conditionally accepted you, they're going to want to hear back by a certain date. Make sure you're tracking those very carefully. Going to slide 13. Um, it would be disingenuous to say that no applications are declined based on perceived deficiencies in the presented materials. Of course, that happens. However, while it can be easy to think that the reason that you are declined is only that you're not good enough, or very often that's simply not the case. For those of you who've either attended or watched previous sessions, you might remember from an early one that it took me, myself, for example, 3 years to get into a PhD program. By that point, I had narrowed down to only a couple programs. But those first 3 years, I was applying to several programs and I got rejected by all of them. So I very much understand sort of what that can feel like. But trust me, it's not, it's never personal, and it's very often not always about the quality of materials.
And in terms of my case, I applied to 6 PhD programs and 1 master's program. Of the 6 PhDs that I applied to during undergrad, I only got into one. So
Yeah.
I can definitely emphasize in terms of how it feels as well.
Yeah, it's incredibly important not to take the rejections personally. It's always, even if it's about a perceived deficiency in the application, it's always about the materials, not you. There's always a better way you can sort of present it, or it's about fit, some dimension of fit, or space, or things like that. Applicants are declined for lots of reasons they cannot influence. No matter how good the application is, or the applicant, or how personally or academically qualified you might be. Common reasons include, for example, the faculty that you would want to work with might be on sabbatical currently, or about to go on sabbatical, so they can't take on new students. When we say sabbatical, it just means when faculty are excused from their normal teaching duties. Often they may even leave campus for extended periods of time, either to focus entirely on research or sometimes even to teach at other universities. So they can't take you on because they won't be there to take you on. They may also have parental leave, or just all kinds of reasons they just aren't available for new students. It could also be that they are the potential advisors that you would be assigned to are between grants and need to focus on gaining more funds to support students before they can take on more students, or their own research focus has shifted in ways that aren't reflected, perhaps in their publications yet or online in their profiles, and so the fit that you've sort of described based on what they have published no longer maybe applies, and that's not really your fault. Strong candidates are declined all the time. Again, I told a story early on about an applicant that a department that I was a part of, affiliated with, tried really hard to accept because everyone agreed the application was immensely strong, but just at the end of the day, just they couldn't make it make sense and fit within the contents of that year in that program. Um,
And just to quickly, before
yeah,
I let Dan move on, I just wanted to chime in. This is another reason why it's a really good idea to contact these faculty members before as you're applying. We've said this before and I'll say it again because that way you know ahead of time. If you reach out to them in September and they tell you, oh, I'm going to be on leave, then you know, okay, I'm not going to include that person on my application. Versus if you're just doing this without reaching out to them on a whim, then you're more likely to the faculty might not be able to take you on, and you don't have that communication established early on with that faculty member. So
or at the
another reason to reach out.
Yeah, or at the very least, you reach out to, when you find that out, you reach out to more faculty, and you can still include them as maybe one potential person on your application, but you sort of acknowledge that they're not around and you have some other people, and maybe they'll join your committee later on, maybe secretly in your heart, you're going to try to switch your advisors later on. However, yeah, your application can't rely on that person exclusively. But yeah, it's a great point. If you don't get accepted anywhere, you can always try to get feedback from admissions committees, or at least whatever faculty member on the committee you may have received a response email from. Many will say they can't give feedback for various reasons, but it never hurts to ask. They're not gonna be mad that you asked for feedback. Um, it's just that often they can't for whatever one reason or another. You might consider master's programs, perhaps at a university where you hope to do a PhD. That's what I did personally, and it really helped me understand not just the context of PhD programs more broadly, but specifically some of the ones that I was trying to apply to, and it really helped me improve my materials dramatically the next year. You may also just, if you already have a lot, going on in your materials, you can also simply just consider reapplying the following year, depending on where you are and what you're doing. You can save those application materials and update them for the next cycle. Maybe work a bit of an interrelated job in industry if you can. The most important thing though is even if your application is already fantastic objectively and you get feedback that's like, yeah, everyone loved you, but and everyone sort of thought you'd be great to work with, but also everyone's really full this year and we just can't take on students, right? That doesn't mean you can just apply the same application the next year. You still want to focus on how you can improve it even more to show that you didn't just, stay put over that year, that you were continuing to try to grow. Because actually, if you just submit the same materials, even if they were amazing, if they see the same thing, it may not feel as amazing. So it's good to sort of continue to grow. Next slide, 14 for Karen.
Thanks, Dan. So in terms of if you get admitted, if you're accepted, there's several things to keep in mind within the letter, the offer letter that you get itself. So first off, one thing that is going to be mentioned in there in some way is advising. And there's different ways that the letter might bring up advising. And on the one hand, it might name a faculty member who will be advising you. Or on the other, you might have a couple of years to be able to decide who your advisor is. You'd be able to rotate from one lab to the other as you figure out who a good advisor is to work with. Or there could also be a version that combines both of these two choices, and it might identify the advisor by name as an interim advisor as you rotate through the process. So it might name a person and still say, okay, it's going to be Dr. X, but you still get to go from one lab to another to figure out who your advisor will be like in the long term. In terms of health insurance, it's also important that you look at this information really carefully in terms of what is covered health insurance wise. And this might be mentioned briefly in the letter, and it would be given in more detail in a separate file. Make sure that you're looking for details in terms of for those who might be married or have children, look for that information as well in terms of the health insurance. And in terms of what is offered, usually nowadays, there's at least some form of minimal healthcare is usually included when you're an undergraduate. In terms of a PhD student, you might receive something a little more upgraded from the student plans that you might be on. Or there would be you could have a variation of healthcare that staff receive because, again, the PhD students are employees of the university. Another aspect to keep in mind is housing. Some universities might offer grad housing support, and it could be either available or guaranteed. So it would be up to you. If it's available, it would be up to you to decide, okay, would you like it or not? And in the case of guaranteed, we have it, you can definitely have advantage of housing. So make sure that you're reading the fine print. It could also be housing that is subsidized on or close to the campus, or you could also be given a voucher or a stipend to help you cover the cost of housing. And make sure that you're looking at the details really closely. We'll be talking more about money in a couple of slides, but housing availability and the cost of it are one of the most important parts of one of the most important financial burdens that you'll be juggling as a PhD student. So make sure that you know what is being offered and how well that offer aligns with what your needs are. Housing is also something we'll come back to more in terms of when we speak about negotiating. Another item that the letter should mention is deadlines for when your decision needs to be made. So by decision, we're referring to when do you need to decide that you're going to a campus or not? By when do you need to let them know? That should usually be mentioned in the letter. If it's not in the letter for whatever reason, the date, make sure that you're asking them when is that date, and they'll usually let you know and like apologize if it's not already there. It should be there, and that would also be something that you include in your spreadsheet as well. When do you need to let them know? The deadlines for decisions are usually sometime in April, but it could also vary based off of when the program might schedule their campus visits, for example. So you generally don't have to provide a decision about whether or not you're going to the campus until after you actually get to visit the campus in person. Next slide, then.
All right. So funding is often one of the more important aspects of your acceptance or offer letter. What is the sort of support you're going to receive to be able to succeed in these programs? Um, funding, we've discussed this a little bit before, but funded PhD programs in the US, which is the more common model, they tend to offer at least some of the following, some sort of stipend of some kind, tuition and fee remission, so that you're not paying for your fees. That's a part of your sort of compensation. And as we already sort of covered a little bit, healthcare. Um, you Sorry, yeah. And then funding generally has constraints attached. And this is important to sort of recognize, right? We've gone back to this a couple times, but essentially it's being a PhD student slash employee, right, is a complicated, sometimes variable position to be in. But it is sort of important to think about like the fact that in some ways you're sort of a contractor for this position. It's temporary. It is a job, but it's not a career to be a grad student, right? So there's often, for example, a maximum number of years that they'll fund you. It's not just a blanket like, hey, like we'll pay you until you get your PhD, even if that takes 20 years. That's not the case, right? They are expecting you to make normative progress towards your degree, and that's usually outlined in your letter exactly how many years they expect to pay you, essentially a maximum number of years they'll expect to pay you. Another really important detail to look for, or if you don't see it, to think about asking, is whether or not you're getting paid for summers. Stipends tend to follow the academic year. Not always, some programs do just pay you for the whole 12 years, but a lot of programs will only pay you for the academic years. And then during the summer, uh, they may offer some other forms of support or they may not. And that's a really big question depending on what your circumstances are. Because, just because they're not giving you stipends over the summer, you do still need to find a way to pay the rent, to eat, that sort of things. Um, so, yeah, if they do only go there, start asking what the supplementary income opportunities are that may be available, or how else students tend to support themselves within that program. And that's something we'll come back to in a few minutes. Um, yeah, just to reemphasize, you are, for all intents and purposes, an employee. Those details are often not only briefly outlined in the letter, but usually in some other supplementary material, just like the healthcare. There is usually some sort of contract, although it's not always called that, accompanies with an offer or comes soon after you accept it to sign again. Um, Other funding considerations to sort of to look at is that again, there's strings attached, right? It's considered compensation, not for you doing your degree, but often for some level of teaching support or research support. Uh, Technically, you are compensated for part-time labor work. You are more of a work study than simply being paid to be a PhD student. Again, basic details should be included. Often there are out-of-pocket fees, especially if you are out of state or out of country. You're going to have additional fees, or there may be other caveats involved with sort of the timing on certain things. So definitely pay attention to that, especially again if you are accepting a program or considering a program that is not in the state that you're a resident or in the country of your residence. All right, so let's talk about campus visits. Many schools invite applicants for a campus visit, often before admission decisions are required, as Karen already said. That is generally, anyway, acceptance is not a requirement to attend these for reasons I'll return to in a moment. And then, yeah, again, they generally put their date for just decisions after the campus visit. Um, However, not only are these trips paid for by the program generally, campus visits are often your last and best chance to get to know the program you are considering, and even more importantly, perhaps the people who are a part of them, either people that you might work with or just people that you might be in the same program with. These visits let you meet more people, ask more questions of those people, and get a stronger sense of the campus itself and the surrounding area that you're going to be, living in. Take advantage of them and act responsibly and appropriately, given they are paying for the trip there. And again, they've at this point likely given you an offer. In fact, they've almost certainly given you an offer. However, at this point, it is important to know that there's a sort of switch that happens because at this point, they're trying to impress you. They've already sent you a conditional acceptance letter and offer. Uh, if you've been accepted, right? So at a certain level, you can sort of start to think about relaxing a little bit, still be professional. You don't want to, embarrass yourself or do anything sort of too out there. But really sort of this is now you're no longer trying to sort of impress them first date interview energy. You are now at this point trying to, get the goods, get the information. Karen, you had a comment on this one?
Yeah, I was just going to say, one thing to keep in mind as you're attending these visits is to also request accommodations. If you need to request accommodations, make sure that you're requesting them. By accommodations on the slide, we're referring to disability related accommodations or other ones within reason. So I'm happy to, for anyone who might be thinking about requesting disability related accommodations, I'm happy to brainstorm about what those might be, if that applies to you, because I have a disability myself. So I have the lived experience. I'm happy to like talk off or email offline with anyone who might have that type of a question.
Right. Let's go into the next slide. This is a sample schedule for a possible campus visit. It is important to note this is a sample, right? So depending on the universities that you might be going to or looking at, this could be very organized, very different. However, even if the schedule ends up looking different, even if the exact activities are different, the intent is going to remain fairly consistent, right? There's a lot of generally they're feeding you, obviously, because taking you out here. But there's generally a lot of like presentations like, hey, look at how great our program is. Look at how great our university is. Again, they're trying to impress you. They're going to give you a lot of statistics about how good stuff is. They're going to tell you a lot about information about the sort of nature of the program. Um, if they're I think if they are a lot of programs will do a grad student panel. I know that in my program when I came, not only did they do a grad student panel, but they made a very big show of like we're gonna leave the room, and they shut the door. So it is very much a really good opportunity to sort of have a conversation with current PhD students, ask hard questions, get hopefully really good information before they sort of continue on. There's usually some sort of tour, at least of the program and department areas. If you're lucky, you might get a full campus tour to really get a good look at that. There's usually often, as part of maybe that tour, you'll see some of the labs. Uh, some visit days will have sort of opportunities for one-on-one sessions with faculty, which can feel very scary when you see it on a schedule because it can look like you're, oh, I'm going to get interviewed one more time. But it's really usually not about that. It's actually either a faculty who has expressed interest in getting to know you a little bit more based on the application materials, or just someone the program folks think that it might be good to talk to because maybe you didn't mention them in the application, but maybe they, want to get to know you, or it might be a good idea. So it's an opportunity just to meet more potential coworkers. And there's usually some sort of talk, more snacks, and then often some kind of other various levels of social activities and meals and things like that. Um,
And quickly,
it's
just
all
returning to
Go
the
ahead.
faculty point about like meeting with faculty during the visit days, this could also be faculty who you mentioned in your application.
Yeah,
So it could also be people who you were aspiring to work with that you could still like meet in person. Now it's your chance to meet them in person. How cool is that? Like if it's people
yeah,
who you're really wanting to work with, I would see it more as an opportunity to meet new people. Don't see it as like a big like scary moment where you're trying to get interviewed again. See it as an opportunity to interact with them more and see what they're like as people.
yeah. Campus visits are almost holy opportunities. They are not at this stage. Again, you've already been offered an acceptance. They are try to relax, right? At a certain point, right? Because you're really getting information. And also there's usually a lot of breaks. Usually, current students are encouraged by programs to go to those little coffee breaks and stuff like that. So that's more opportunities to sort of just have conversations with new grad students. Uh, don't think of it as networking, like sort of the businessy sort of sometimes it sort of gets like a sleazy reputation. It's just humans meeting that might, work together next year. Um, and really at the end of the day, that's what this is about, right? It's getting to know people and that sort of thing. All right. So, uh, possible concerns you may have, right? And these are something to think about. If you're invited to several visit days, you're getting acceptances from multiple programs, you may not be able to make them all, right? So it's important to sort of to prioritize the ones that you still need information about, right? That you have uncertainties about that you're not really sure about. Uh, Also, or if, depending on how scheduling permits, you might be able to, jump literally from one visit day and go to the next visit day the next day, depending on, how they're all willing to arrange travel. And so really thinking about sort of what works for your schedule. And then if the official campus day that they're sending you is a date that you just cannot make for one reason or another, don't feel compelled to say yes and like burn some bridge to go to these campus visits. Let them know, hey, like I really want to come to the campus visit. However, it's just really not possible for me on that day. If it was any other day, or if it was, maybe some other days, I could. Sometimes, especially if you sort of really lay it out there, they will do a sort of one-off visit. It doesn't cost them any more money to sort of fly you out a different day. So sometimes they'll just be like, okay, well, you know what, we can't, if you can't make it for the official day, we'll have a sort of mini visit day. We'll fly you out for this other day, and you can at least meet some food people. You won't meet some of the other potential cohort people, which is unfortunate, but you can still come out and check it out. Sometimes they'll do that. Um, and so yeah, or they'll do something virtual. They'll try to, again, they're trying to convince you to come. So they will often, you know, do what they can to sort of come up with some other activity for you. So let's think about some typical questions, right? So when you're there, there are, three different folks you're going to want to talk to, right? Students, faculty, and then you're also going to be talking to like administrators, staff, department chairs, things like that. When you're talking to current students, these are the people who you might have you who are the most valuable people to ask questions of. These are the people who are where you are trying to be, right? They are experiencing the thing that you're wanting to experience. They are the best sort of resource for the kind of information about the decision that you're making. Um, how good do they still feel about their decision to be in that program, essentially, right? So you want to be, and you want to get to know them, right? So these are also potentially new colleagues, coworkers, essentially, asking them about their research and their interests. We made a joke in an early session about how like asking and answering the question of like what's your research project is about half of being a PhD student. So asking them about that, asking them about department culture, asking them that question about what folks do over the summer. Asking students how they pay the rent over the summer is a really great place to get some really valuable information, particularly if those stipends are only for the school year. Um, asking them about different elements of career support, professional support, asking them about programmatic milestones that maybe you still don't understand or that you're worried about, asking them just generally how financially stable they feel, like how supported for success do they feel in their program from a sort of cultural, professional, programmatic, and financial standpoint. And really asking them, especially if you've got unique housing needs, trying to see if you've got kids, trying to see who has kids and how they feel about housing, trying to find folks who have similar backgrounds to you in the program and seeing if they are happy in that program is really, really valuable opportunity. When
And
you
just a
talk to
quick
fact,
thing
go ahead.
to add about going back to summer and funding, make sure that you're asking the students also how many summers were they funded, if any, because sometimes the programs might have only a couple out of let's say it's a 5-year program, you might only have 2 summers funded. So what happens the rest of the 3? Don't think that it's all or nothing. It could be only some of the time that summer is funded.
Yeah. Or I mean, with my program, technically none are funded, but I was funded for all of them because I found, they had opportunities for funding. It just wasn't technically part of the offer.
You have to
And
apply for this
yeah, you have
funding,
to,
this separate funding often.
yeah, and
So
often
that's something else to ask.
it's often stuff like just additional TA work or research assistant work or other things like that. So, um,
Or
but it all depends.
fellowships that you can apply for too,
Yeah,
to
but it
do
all
this.
depends on the program. So you have to ask those questions because sometimes it's not always clearly advertised. When you talk to faculty, in some ways, you're asking a lot of the same questions because it's valuable to ask the same questions for people who are in different positions, right? It's still good to start to ask that research question of faculty. What are you into? You're during this visit day, you're not going to just be meeting people in sort of formally organized context. You're going to meet people over coffee or cookies and dinner. And so getting to know these new faculty that you maybe didn't look at is going to be valuable because again, you're going to just learning more about folks that you maybe didn't know about. Also asking them about department culture, also asking them how their students support themselves over the summer. You're going to get more and more information about the same question from different people with different information. Um, asking them about what sort of research their students are working on, because maybe you haven't met their students yet, that sort of thing. Um, how they organize their research groups and work with their students. And what are the things they do for fun, right? Don't just ask students that. Faculty might have really great responses that are aligned with your interests as well.
And one thing that helped me in terms of asking faculty about research, sometimes you might think, well, why am I going to ask that if they might think I'm not prepared by saying, like, tell me about your research. Have maybe like an index card and you can write down the name of the faculty member and then a little, like a line or two about, okay, these are their rough research interests. So you can say, like, oh, like Dr. X, if you're interested in robotics, can you share more about that? That way they know that you've looked them up as well.
But also some programs are very big and they're not going to be offended if they're big and they're interdisciplinary they are going to know you are not going to know everybody and that's okay. So you don't need to feel although I think that is great advice. Also, do not feel you need to have an index card for like
No,
all
no, no,
six,
not for everyone.
60 faculty and like have the ones that are close
The
that you've
top interest
identified
of
that are
faculty
close
for
to you.
you.
Yeah,
Hmm.
but don't feel like you need to know everyone and they will not be offended if you're like, oh, you know, uh, so yeah, at least most of them won't. Um, if they've got huge egos, there's no guarantee. I don't know what to tell you. If you're meeting department chairs, vice chairs, you likely will. They're going to want to introduce themselves to you because they are sort of running these programs, but you'll also have chances to chat with them sort of more informally, asking them, uh, uh, um, different sort of information about the programmatic progression, especially requirements and milestones that you maybe still have questions about. But you also, ask them that same question about summer, right? That's a big question that you should be asking everyone until you have an answer that you feel comfortable and confident about. Asking them about additional funding opportunities, just supplementary along the way, different sorts of scholarships, fellowships, that sort of thing. You can still ask them what they do for fun, right? Again, even if they might be sort of ostensibly some sort of like if your advisor is kind of your boss, the department chair might be your boss's boss in a sense, but they're still coworkers, right? These are people, you're all going to be adults, you're all going to be doing sort of research and working together. They're humans first before all these things. So just talking to them like you would talk to humans that you might work with is a great start. Another big thing, as we move to the next slide, is that stay in touch after campus visits, regardless of what your decision is, right? Um, if you're really feeling good about it, ask faculty or students the questions that you think of afterward, right? It's not too late. You can always email those folks, reach out, ask some questions that you usually want to hear about you. Um, uh, Something I think I missed on a previous slide is often these programs will assign you admissions buddies. Not always, but a lot of programs do that. Essentially, it's a current grad student who may have somewhat adjacent interests that they just sort of will say, hey, like this is a person that you can reach out to specifically. They've said, okay, ask them questions. So you use that resource. Um, if you provide if you end up saying that you declined, give them some feedback, give them some reasons why. Like they might actually really value that. Or if you really enjoyed it, give them really feedback on the visit day. Always be honest, and also just again remember they're humans. As it says here, right, it's a small world. If you stay in academia, you will meet some of these people again at some point at a conference down the road, randomly. Even if you go into industry, you might encounter these people in the broader research world. So yeah. And then once you accept, just respond as soon as you decide. Once you've made the decision, don't make them wait. Just go ahead and let them know. All right. So as we begin to wrap up, we do want to quickly talk about negotiation. We can't tell you a lot about negotiation, unfortunately. It's not like it is in sort of you might see in movies and things like that. Not only is there no surefire approach to negotiation, but you might not always be able to do so, whether regardless of the program's intent. That's partly because often there isn't much that a program can negotiate about, even if they want to. Many elements of an offer letter are standardized, either set by contracts with unions or other sort of forces. Um, because again, remember, PhD students are often laborers that are often represented by unions. So there's these broader contracts that are being negotiated. That means even if you have leverage in the situation for one reason or another, being super firm in these negotiations is rarely beneficial when it comes to certain parts of it. That being said, we can give you some very basic information about things you maybe can consider, or should you find yourself with a need to negotiate, or again, have some sort of leverage. Uh, Another way to put this, right? Don't try to negotiate just to negotiate. You always want to negotiate in good faith, right? Have a sort of like, hey, like, listen, like, I want to come, but these are the circumstances, right? And see what and ask some questions. Essentially, right? Again, as I said, stipends are generally really difficult to negotiate. They're often sort of set at a certain rate based on either the school or the university more broadly. Um, that being said, if you have another offer from another university, one thing you can sometimes negotiate, or if you have unique relocation challenges, sometimes a lot of universities programs will give you some sort of what I like to call a signing bonus, but essentially sort of an upfront fund. It is often specifically for relocation or other sorts of challenges like that. So if it's for relocation, you have unique relocation challenges, it doesn't hurt to say, hey, listen, I really want to come to your program, but you gave me this much money, and that's just not going to get me there. I need other funds. That's something that they can sometimes work with you on. Or if you have another offer from another university and they're offering you a bigger upfront amount, you can say that, and sometimes they'll match it or try to beat it. Um, Another thing that's often sort of able to be negotiated is housing. Not always. It really sort of depends on the university. If the university has a robust housing program, then you can sometimes negotiate to say, like, listen, I really want to come to your program, but you've offered me a single occupancy grad housing and I have kids. Like, I really need a guarantee that I have a place to put my kids, or I can't come to your program, that sort of thing. Or if you have other sorts of accommodations like disabilities and other things that we've discussed before. Another thing that you can sometimes negotiate is start date. If, for example, you get accepted and you say, listen, I really want to accept this, but since I've applied, months ago now, something has happened. I really don't want to burn this bridge. I have this job that lasts for the next year. Can I defer my enrollment to next year? Right? That's something that you can sometimes negotiate, especially if you've got a compelling case that deferring will help you focus on your project and be that much more successful or maintain opportunities for you later on. That's a really good case that you can make to say, listen, I really want to do this, but can we defer it? Um,
And
yeah,
quickly, just to jump in terms of going back to disability accommodations, just that's one thing to negotiate for when you're admitted as well, because the accommodations that you have during an interview might be different than the accommodations that you need as a student. So really take the time to visit any disability offices that the campuses might have, because that could also affect your decision as well.
absolutely. Essentially, when it comes to negotiation, as it says at the bottom, ask yourself what you're really, uh, if what you're hoping to get is something you need to succeed. And if that's the case, it might be worth requesting prior to acceptance. Essentially, is the way that I would approach it. Rather than trying to play hardball or be negotiating, tough person or whatever, it's really just like, hey, just be honest, act in good faith. What are the things you need to succeed? Ask if they're doable. Sometimes they are, right? And that's really what it comes down to. And then, yeah, next slide, Karen.
Thanks, Dan. So now we're just going to briefly summarize a lot of what we've talked about in a short amount of time. The next slide, then.
Yep.
So, interviews, as we've talked about, they're a really good opportunity to really learn about the faculty that you'll be working with, as well as for them to learn about you, figure out anything that wasn't necessarily mentioned in your application for you to be able to elaborate on that as well. Um, no news can really be good news in terms of responses, be patient. Just because you don't hear from them doesn't mean that you're rejected. And once you receive an offer of acceptance, make sure that you're also taking the time to evaluate the programs without being overconfident. And campus visits are a really valuable opportunity for you to be able to continue getting a better understanding of the campus itself, of the program, and returning to negotiation. Use that as an opportunity to think of negotiation more from a needs-based perspective. What are your needs, and how might you be able to work with the university to be able to get those needs met, and make sure that you're communicating with the university as you make your final decision. The next slide. Returning to the question of recordings, you can make sure that you can we have a playlist up on YouTube that has all of these workshop recordings available on it from this year and a previous year. So please feel free to watch any videos from that playlist as well on that page, and we'll make sure to add the link to the chat as well. And you can see here the different titles. Feel free to look at any that you might have missed. The next slide. And here is our contact information for Dan and I. As we've mentioned, this is the final workshop. There's no workshop next week. So this is the final time you'll see us here on Zoom, but please feel free to reach out to us if we might be able to answer any questions that you might have down the line. Thanks for adding it in the chat. And please make sure that, again, we ask for your feedback. These workshops, we've tried to incorporate the feedback that you've given into the workshops. We hope that we've met your feedback requests. And again, we ask for your feedback during this workshop as well to be able to improve the workshop for the next cohort in several months from now. And you should be redirected to the feedback at the end of the Zoom session. You'll be taken there automatically, and it's less than 5 minutes, super short. And then next slide, please. And finally, please feel free to stay connected with the Computing Research Association. You can feel free to connect with them on social media. Here are all the handles and whatnot as well. And we have a little bit of time left, surprisingly enough. So
Yeah,
we're happy to take any questions that you might have as well.
right on time.
We've covered a lot, so.
Yeah, absolutely. But we did want to make sure that there was a little bit of time at the end to sort of answer any sort of lingering questions. We covered a lot today, but I mean, also happy to answer questions that you might still have from previous sessions, that sort of thing.
And also, one thing I forgot to mention with the past slide going back to YouTube, there's also an email address on there for the undergraduate research to PhD staff from the Computing
All
Research
right.
Association. So you can also feel free to reach out to them as well. They're also a valuable resource.
Absolutely.
Yes, the slides will be made available. The question was if slides are available. They'll be made available after today ends. We'll be sending out a big file of all the slides from all the sessions in one deck. No worries.
So yeah, Anthony asked if they didn't realize US universities consider PhD students employees, should I expect a contract upon accepting? Yeah, very likely. Yeah, I mean, so yeah, we've covered. If you haven't already, you may want to go back and review some of our earlier ones, especially the first video in the series. Essentially, PhD students at most U.S. universities, any that are funded, are the closest category is essentially if you're familiar with work study programs as an undergrad. It's just that instead of working in like a food hall or the library or computer lab, you are a TA or you're a research assistant or things like that. So, yeah, essentially, it's usually a contract for you're actually technically a part-time employee. Usually, there's always sort of caveats here, so I'm speaking generally, but also just take it generally rather than specifically. But yeah, you're generally expected to work a certain amount of hours a week. Work. It's yeah, you don't have time cards or anything like that. It's more of a salary, but you are sort of expected to do a certain amount of contribution to teaching or research support, and then in return for the compensation that you receive.
So just a small thing to chime in, when you all are making your resumes, like down the line as grad students, you can technically include this as employment.
Yeah,
Just an FYI.
absolutely. Not only can, should.
Yeah, should. Fair. Yeah, should.
Particularly
Good
if you're
point.
going into like industry, right? Because if you're folks in academia tend to understand that you were working during that period of time. Uh, they won't see that as a gap in your resume, but if you're applying to like an industry position, and sure they'll see you got a PhD, but if they don't have a PhD, they may not know that you were working during that period of time. So they might either assume you have a gap in employment of however many years you're in your PhD program, or they may have to ask you about it, in which case it's best just to say like, hey, this is what I was doing. And that'll depend on whatever your exact responsibilities in your PhD program were. And that also can change if you've got external funding. So there are folks who get certain fellowships during their PhD program, in which case their job is to do research, and there's sort of expectations that you're doing more stuff. But you would also put that on a resume as well, and it would explain away what's going on.
Right. I just said that to make sure that there's no misconception. Like, being
Yeah.
a grad student is a job. Being a PhD student is a job in and of itself.
Well, it is, but it's also it's tricky. It's a tricky, complex category, right? Because there are some
True.
elements of it that are like billable hours essentially, and there are some that are not. And that is sometimes a complex distinction, but it's valuable to sort of reflect on that and when you are sort of on billable time versus not. So yeah, Anthony asks, are expectations for autonomy negotiable, especially surrendering part or all of a stipend or other compensation in exchange for time? I'd accept less money in exchange for better work-life balance, but maybe not all universities are like that. That's interesting. I have never thought about just saying, "Hey, I don't want the stipend. I'm going to go. I'm just going to do it." But I mean, I don't know your financial situation, but without my stipend, I wouldn't have been able to survive. Um, they're not massive amounts of money. It's not like you're getting paid well for the work that you're doing. However, um, you're not. It's not like you're suddenly wealthy as a PhD student. It was. I come from a sort of a passive, like very working class employment. So for me, it was the best paying job I'd have up to that point in my life. That being said, objectively, it's not, a ton of money. Um, but your concern for work-life balance is really valid. Some programs are better at encouraging that than others. That being said, yeah, you should sort of keep an eye on that. Yeah. Harper says, thank you, Karen and Dan, for leading this very helpful series. Oh, thank you very much. Uh,
Oh, you're welcome.
our pleasure.
I was gonna say time-wise too, the normative time to degree, which is like how long the program expects you to take, it's not necessarily fixed in stone. There can be exceptions made if you take longer to finish the program. So even if it says like 5 years, they might give you like some funding for a subsequent year. So keep that in mind. Don't think like
Well,
it depends on where you're going.
I
If you're a
will.
national student,
I will actually
international is
say,
stricter.
yeah, there's a couple caveats to that. Technically speaking, the normative time degree is set in stone. It's usually set by the registrar of the university. However, funding usually allows for longer than the normative time. So this will depend on the university. However, on average, they will give you a funding guarantee of like normative plus 1 year, right? Or if you're really lucky, normative plus 1 year with the chance to extend another, right? That sort of thing. So there is absolutely flexibility, exactly like Karen said, but normative time degree is set by the registrar. It's updated sometimes, but for the most part, like there is a technically characteristic of a program called normative time degree that all universities have, and that time determines a lot of things. Um, but yeah, no, it's but your funding is technically independent of it at the same time. And yeah, oh, but actually you mentioned the international student thing. That's another important thing too, yeah, is that often like that's a topic we didn't really get into is for folks coming from outside the US, your visa is
Mm-hmm.
often tied to that normative time degree as well. So that's something to keep in mind. Um, and there may be flexibility on that too, but again, that's going to be university dependent. So something to keep in mind for any international students.
So that's both coming here to the US to study, but also leaving as well. Because I know, I don't know who, but somebody before was asking about like leaving to
Yeah, yeah.
study somewhere else.
But that's a whole
That's a
yeah,
whole other
that's going to
thing
vary by country. We
for
don't have
sure.
the remit to cover that in this
Mm-mm.
workshop, unfortunately. We are also over time, so I think we can stop recording if we haven't already. But I'm happy to sit around and answer any other potential questions that some folks may have, at least for a little bit.
Same here.